So you're saying that your approach is the same as DNA evidence, now that you're talking about police. Same certainty applies to your opinion as it does to DNA evidence.
No, I'm not saying that.
It doesn't, does it? Because that has a standard, an objective standard that people can go out and retest if they wanted to, right?
There's decomposition in DNA standards.
Are you an expert in DNA, Nick?
No, but I've read.
Right, but you're not an expert, right?
No, I'm not.
So in terms of a sample that's not biodegraded, and you have all of the loci that match, if we're going to talk about that, and those, you get a profile, correct?
Wait, me or
Objection.
DNA?
Objection, Judge. She just said she's not an expert in DNA.
Overruled.
In a DNA test, you get a profile, don't you?
I don't know.
So then why, if you don't know about this test, do you want to now tell us about a biodegradable substance?
I'm only saying what I've heard in trials.
Right, but you are not, in a sense, telling us that.
And there is a profile. There is I don't know enough to be an expert, but I know enough to know something, and probably people who watch CSI know enough to say something.
The issue that I'm presenting, or the question that I'm presenting to you is, isn't it true that your approach does not have the certainty that would allow an independent individual, somebody else, to go back and start the investigation again and reach the same results that you would, right?
I don't know.
Well, is it like a DNA test, your approach?
No, it isn't.
Is it like a blood test, your approach?
No, it isn't.
And your approach, is it even a little lower than that? You are familiar with what psychologists do, right?
Are you talking about testing?
No, I'm just familiar. Are you familiar with what they do? What kind of work they do?
Psychologists?
Yes.
Well, I specifically, and what are you referring to?
I'm referring to the field of forensics. You're here as a forensics expert, aren't you?
I'm here as a domestic violence expert.
Well, but forensic means that you present it in court. You understand that, right?
I know that, but
right.
There are a lot of psychologists who don't present in court.
I understand that, but I'm asking you if you're familiar generally with the job that a psychologist does.
Objection, vague foundation.
Approach. You may continue.
Are you familiar with what psychologists do in the forensic field?
Much of what they do involves testing.
So you are familiar with what they do, correct?
I think the difference between what they do and what I do is testing primarily.
And what you do basically, ma'am, is you sit and you talk to people, right? Because you don't test, correct?
Correct.
And you read things, correct?
I do.
And in fact, one could say that you are a counselor, correct?
I'm a psychotherapist, yes.
But basically what we're really talking about when we break it down is that you're a counselor, right?
I'm a psychotherapist by profession, Mr. Martinez.
And you don't do any testing, right?
No, I don't.
So that we could go out and take a look at your raw data or whatever answers were provided so that somebody else could examine them, right?
Correct.
All we have to rely on with you is what you tell us is your interpretation of what you've read and what you've heard, correct?
That would be true. And in addition to that, I would just say that testing is somewhat subjective too. And when you look at testing, the caveat with testing is this should not be used to stand alone. This should be used in conjunction with the things that you're talking about that I do, if it's used.
But you don't do any testing, do you?
No, I don't.
You're not an expert in testing, are you?
No.
So what you just told us now, in a sense, is you haven't had the schooling that would allow you to make the statements as it applies to these tests, right?
I work with people who do the tests, and we work in conjunction, and so we go over testing together, But do I do testing? No, I don't do testing.
And that's left for others that have a higher degree than you, correct?
Sure.
And when you are evaluating a case, you have to, not you have to, but what you do is basically, as we said before, you sit down and you hear what people have to say, and you look at what they've written, and in a sense, you have to make a call as to whether or not you are going to believe the written word or believe the spoken word, correct?
No, that's not true.
Well,
I can believe both or not believe both. I turn down cases where I find...
Judge, non-responsive. Ma'am, I'm asking you in terms of your analysis, isn't it true that to further your analysis, you're acting as a gatekeeper in the sense that you choose to believe something or you choose to disbelieve something depending on what you think?
No, depending on the evidence, Mr. Martinez.
I agree that you have items in front of you, but you would agree with me that others may see something differently than you, correct?
That's possible, sure.
So that, for example, if you choose to believe somebody, somebody else may choose to disbelieve them, right?
If I choose to believe somebody, that somebody else could disbelieve it. Yes,
Correct.
that's possible.
So that's the type of approach that you used in this case, right?
I gathered evidence, Mr. Martinez. I don't know what to say. I took a lot of evidence. I read a lot of materials. I did a lot of interviewing. I read a lot of collateral sources. And that's how I came up with a decision that I came to even testify in this case.
Can we agree now that you did read a lot, that you talked to one person, and that you then came to your conclusion? We can agree to that, all right? Given that, isn't it true that even though you have all of that, isn't it true that it's still what your opinion is that cannot be verified that we are talking about today?
That cannot be verified.
Correct. We cannot, for example, go in and input it into a computer and get a result, right?
I have no idea. I'm not good with computers. I don't know when you put, I mean, people, FBI's people profile, and they have a lot of information, and they put it together and they create a profile that you can agree with or not agree with, but that profile is inputted into a computer, and they look at it, and they look at, and there's a lot of information that is looked at in terms of domestic violence where people have taken data and put it together. So I'm just not exactly sure where you want me to go with this, but this is, for me, the truth of it.
Ma'am, with regard to profilers, do you know whether or not that evidence is admissible in court? Yes or no?
No, I don't.
So you're giving us an example of somebody that is giving an opinion, right? The profiler is giving an opinion, correct?
Correct.
And that opinion is used sometimes by law enforcement, right?
Yes.
And that opinion can be wrong and it can be right depending on the profiler, right?
Correct.
And it can be wrong 100% of the time because it depends on what the person that is profiling is thinking, right?
I don't think it's just a matter of what they're thinking. I think it's their experience. I think it's what they're reviewing. I think it's a lot of things.
Sure, but you can't input what their information is into a computer and come up with a name, for example, of the person who committed the crime, right? If you're a profiler.
If you're a profiler, you might be able to come up with a collection. I don't know, Mr. Martinez. This is really not my expertise. I'm just simply saying that there's groups of people that put information together and they get things out on a computer. I'm not one of those people because I'm not a computer whiz.
With regard to whether or not you're a computer whiz or not, even if you were a computer whiz, there is no way that your approach would fit a computer, would it? There's no way to input it into a computer and come up with a verifiable result, right?
Objection, foundation, and knowledge.
Overruled. Me answer.
I really don't know.
And with regard to the profiler, it is true that you're the one that brought that up as an example, correct?
Yes, I did.
Ma'am, one of the things that you keep talking to me about is context. You always, or in the morning you talk to me about context, right?
Correct.
And you've indicated that it's really important in determining whether or not you are going to make an assessment one way or the other, right?
Correct.
And we have exhibit number 444, which is a series of text messages. And this involves an individual by the name of Michelle K. and Mr. Alexander wanting to know about this information that this Michelle K. may have provided to the defendant, right?
Objection, Judge, foundation, give the time, date of what we're referring to, please.
Yes.
It's exhibit number 444.
Right, what's the date?
Right?
The text messages are dated.
Judge, it's improper. Her objection is improper. If she doesn't understand, that's the problem, not her.
May we approach?
You may approach. Sustained.
You remember talking about this text message to us? Yes or no?
Yes, but the name is incorrect.
I understand that you say the name is incorrect. All I'm asking you, man, is whether or not you remember talking to us about this text message. Yes or no?
Yes.
And the date on it, it's halfway down, is April 7th of 2008. You see that?
Yes.
And you're saying, well, the name there is incorrect, right?
Yes.
And you're talking about either Michelle or Elena, right? One of those names, according to you, even though you weren't there, is incorrect, right?
According to the information I received.
I understand that that's what you are relying on. But according to you, you chose to make a decision based on what somebody else may have told you or what you may have read to make a determination here, right?
Objection, compound question.
Overruled.
Right?
Yes.
And somebody else could have come up with a different conclusion than you, couldn't they?
About the name?
Yeah, about the name.
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
I guess.
Sure, because there's nothing really scientific about that approach, is there?
About what approach?
Your approach in making a determination as to which name is accurate.
No, I suppose there isn't.
And ma'am, one of the things that we know is that Mr. Alexander is talking about a BS story, right?
Yes.
And he's talking about this BS story about somebody coming over to where the defendant worked, right?
Yes.
And this woman came over to Ruby Tuesdays, correct?
Yes.
And this woman came up to the defendant, right?
Yes.
And this woman came up to the defendant and divulged that Mr. Alexander had been having a relationship with Lisa Andrews for a period of time, right?
Correct.
And so in terms of context, that's something that we can consider. The fact that the defendant is the one that told you about that, right?
Yes.
She's the one that told you the name of the restaurant, right?
Yes.
And you're the one that sat down in your notes and you wrote it down, right?
Yes.
And additionally, you decided to adopt the story as true, right? In other words, you believe the defendant when she told you that somebody came to this restaurant and told her about the relationship with Lisa, right?
That was not a real significant piece of information for me, Mr. Martinez.
I understand that you may say that now, but it is something that was significant enough for you to write down, correct?
I wrote lots of things down.
So is that yes or no?
It's neither. It's
Well,
just a thing I wrote down. I write notes to myself. It was significant enough, I suppose, to write it down, but whether it was significant enough it's something I wrote down.
Yes, you did write it down, and it is part of your notes, correct?
Yes.
And you try to be as accurate as you possibly can with your notes, don't you?
Yes.